Hey everyone, welcome to the happy hour. This is your host Adam Sithioglat. Um, we're here with my co-host Tim Erskine. This is our third show, um, and Tim, you've been waiting for the show. I think you've been telling me how much after our last one. I think Tim really wanted to do this. So
Yeah, I'm really interested in talking to someone. I love beer, and I've made beer in the past, and I just like talking to other people that love beer.
great. And this is ironically our third show, but it is our first to be about alcohol, given that the name of the show is the Happy Hour. Um, but it is also the first where we are able to drink on the show and enjoy and talk about it. So, with that said, I'd like to welcome our guest. Now, he is well known in the beer community, maybe not so much outside the beer community, but this is Kyle Kirker, and he is a beer expert, enthusiast, aficionado. Welcome, Kyle.
Hi guys, thanks for having me on for the inaugural alcohol episode.
Absolutely, can't wait.
So first of all, we're going to be talking about a couple different beers. We're going to be doing some beer tasting and discussing a couple different subjects that are relevant to the beer community at this time. So I think we'll start out with getting our first beer tasting started.
The most important part.
All right, Kyle, take over.
Yeah. So first one we're going to be tasting today is a Helles lager from a German brewery called Weihenstephaner. They are, as it says on the bottle, the oldest brewery in the world. Been around since 1040, coming up on their 1,000-year anniversary. But this is, as you can see, a pretty sort of straw yellow colored lager from Germany. I like it personally, just because it's got a nice crispness, not overly bitter. I feel like Pilsner is kind of more a popular style of light lager these days, but to me they come off a little too maybe floral and bitter sometimes. So this one's a little bit more balanced with the malt, I think. Cheers, guys.
Cheers.
Yeah, so this is my kind of beer right here. Just something simple. It goes down smooth.
Yeah. As my dad likes to call these kinds of beers, these are guzzling beers for those warm days when you just want to really take a couple down.
Yeah, it's got a nice floral, but it's not really hop forward even in the aroma.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I like about it. It's got a little bit of I like to call it crispness, but probably just the tiniest bit of like the hop balancing it out, but it's not really at the forefront. A Pilsner, you kind of get more of the like herbal kind of spicy flavor from the hops. So it can be a little more impactful. But this one I feel like is just kind of the perfect balance for me personally. It's one of my favorite styles of beer, especially in warm weather.
I occasionally like Pilsner Urquell. That's another one, and it's a little less sweet than this.
Yeah.
It's a good beer, but maybe it goes down too easy. There's just not quite enough flavor to it.
Yeah. No, I get what you mean. I think that comes back to the hops. I think maybe overpowering the malt body a little bit, and so you'll pick up as much of the sweetness or the breadiness from the malt.
Now, Kyle, I want to ask you a question. So what now? COVID-19. Everybody's tired of talking about it and hearing about it. But I got to ask about how it has influenced beer. Like, are the beers that are people dropping out of the business? Are are people just going to breweries? Or like how exactly is beer still doing well during COVID-19?
Yeah, so obviously a hot topic in this day and age, COVID. It's been a struggle for a lot of breweries, and there definitely have been some closures. I know of a handful of tap rooms and such in the area that have closed down. But breweries, just as any business, have had to learn to adapt kind of to all this. And I believe some regulations have relaxed a little bit, but there's been a lot of breweries out there who have turned to shipping their beers within state, at least here in California. So I believe in other states they're shipping within their own states too. There's still a lot of legality about shipping across state borders, but within California, a lot of California breweries have moved to shipping, and so it's actually kind of interesting because beers that you generally wouldn't have access to locally, you now have access to all of a sudden, because I can go to a brewery from San Diego's website and have a case of beer shipped to my door within a week. And most of these guys are doing their shipping overnight as well to make sure that the beer gets there fresh and doesn't sit somewhere in a hot truck or warehouse or anything like that.
And that was difficult before, like getting beer from different areas of the state or other states even. But I'm guessing now it's still probably within the state mostly.
Yeah, exactly. So it's they still pretty much stay within state borders because there's still a lot of weird liquor laws around that kind of stuff crossing state borders.
The wine industry.
Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
The wine industry has had that problem for quite a while.
Yeah.
California wines can't be shipped to every state, just some states.
Yeah. With COVID, I believe they've relaxed some regulation, but obviously not everything. People know that you can get alcohol to go from restaurants now, which is definitely something due to COVID because you couldn't do that before. But another pretty big impact too for some of the really small breweries, a lot of guys who just do draft on site didn't really have a packaging program. They kind of had to scramble to start packaging their beer or packaging it in greater quantity because they couldn't sell it on site anywhere. And so that's kind of a major change. A lot of these guys don't have the packaging equipment, but there are businesses out there. I think there's one called the Can Van, something like that, but they kind of go around as a mobile packaging line. And so a brewery can call them up and coordinate when they're going to finish. Their batch is going to finish fermenting and be ready for packaging. And then this mobile canning line can come out, package up their beer for them, and then they can have beer to actually sell, either for pickup or for shipping, however they're running their business in this day and age. But it is a lot of breweries have been struggling with, kind of on-site sales in their own tap rooms and at bars that they're usually selling kegs to. Obviously, that business is mostly gone away, although in recent months, kind of coming back. I visited a couple outdoor tap rooms in the recent past, and so they kind of, they'll do reservations, limit seating capacity, but it's nice to see that they're kind of coming back.
What's your favorite place to go to that you've missed since all this?
That I've probably been to the places that I missed the most, like right at the beginning of COVID. So locally here in kind of the greater Bay Area, Fieldwork is one of my personal favorites. So they have a pretty interesting business model. Their main brewery is in Berkeley. But they have satellite tap rooms all over the Bay Area. So San Ramon, San Mateo, down in Monterey, up in Napa. But yeah, they have locations all over the place. So I usually go to the San Mateo location just because it's the closest. And the nice thing about that location is it's outdoors. So in this pandemic, there's plenty of seating to go and visit.
For the breweries that haven't been packaging before this, I know that there's a bunch of issues with labeling, legality of labeling. Do you know if that company that does the canning, if they help you with that process, or are you on your own?
That's a good question, because I know I think it's the ATF. I forget what governing body exactly manages the labels, but yeah, there's like one governing body that has to go through and approve every labeling aspect for all the beers. I don't know if they've changed any of the regulations actually to take into consider COVID, just because so many more people are trying to package their beer out there. I don't know if there's kind of a holdup from that regard. From what I've seen, most of the breweries that I've seen around California are still putting out brand new releases, like stuff they haven't put out before. So new, presumably label approvals. So I haven't seen anything holding up label approvals there. That hasn't been a particular issue that I'm aware of. Although actually kind of on the packaging side, aluminum cans, I had heard were kind of in a shortage for a brief period of time. I'm not sure if they still are, but there were talks of there being shortages during COVID just because everybody now is trying to get aluminum cans to package their beer in. So obviously like the Ball Corporation, I think there's a couple others that do it, were scrambling to up their production to meet demand in the middle of all this.
Well, I read somewhere where the big breweries, Coors, Bud, Miller, had really kind of cornered the market on aluminum. They bought massive futures in aluminum to make sure they'd have it.
Yeah, futures markets are kind of an interesting thing, and actually that's one of a pretty major one in the beer industry, obviously. And so, yeah, you're exactly right. Those are the guys who are not experiencing problems for the shortages. It's the smaller independent craft breweries that are going to struggle when those kinds of things happen. And even hops are almost always bought on futures. And so the most in-demand hops usually go to the bigger breweries, bigger independents, but even the bigger guys can get a hold of some of these contracts. Actually, Anheuser-Busch even owns their own hop growing farms out in South Africa, I believe it is. And they have total control over a couple of the most popular hops in this day and age. And if they want them all for their brewing purposes, they keep them for themselves, obviously, and they don't distribute out any to the little guys. So yeah, when you have shortage situations like this, the smaller independent craft breweries are generally the ones who kind of get the short end of the stick there.
So you're saying Anheuser-Busch actually puts hops in their beer?
Yeah. Never would have guessed, but it is one of the ingredients right after corn.
Now, you know what? I didn't cover like where you have your expertise from. Do you work for one of these big companies, Kyle, or how do you know so much about beer? And how long have you been in the beer arena?
So I actually hated beer when I was 21.
And that's the end of our show for now. Thank you very much for coming.
But at somewhere around 21, 22, I believe, a friend of mine bought a home brewing kit, and he was kind of more into it at the time than I was. But I was like, okay, yeah, this could be some fun. Like, let's make a beer, see what happens, drink it. So he kind of got me into it, and he was a bigger. We'll see him later on in the show, actually, I think. But he was more into it than I was, and I sort of got into it through him. He started introducing me to more styles and this and that, and then slowly but surely, I think I kind of maybe surpassed him a little bit in my fanaticism. But most of my knowledge in the industry just comes from reading everything and anything I can on the internet. So I'm on the Beer Advocate forums, always browsing through there, just kind of looking for what's new, what's the next big thing. I read articles on sort of industry websites, just about industry goings on and just kind of what's happening throughout the industry. Yeah, I just kind of have my ear to the ground through the internet to pick up as much as I can.
Now I'm also I'm a self-proclaimed beer expert, but I'm limited to just drinking beer. Most of the time, I don't remember what beers I drank. So I have enjoyed the one that we have tried so far. And I think we should actually go to the next one.
Yeah, let's do it. So we jump straight from the light and easy drinking to something far more intense. So I've got a double IPA here called Citra from a brewery called Kern River, kind of down in Central California. So this one, like I said, is a double IPA, which, for those of you who might not know, just means it's a bit stronger. It's not exactly double everything. A lot of people think, oh, does that mean they put double all of the ingredients in there? No, that's not exactly what it is, but it is more of the ingredients. So generally you find more malt body in a double IPA, and then usually more aggressive hopping. This one is decidedly West Coast style, so more on the clear side of things. And pretty kind of classic West Coast IPA, I'd say. As you might guess, the beer's called Citra. It uses Citra hops, which is a type of hop. And you could probably guess that the flavor profile that you would get from citrus is kind of citrusy fruit. And even a little bit of like tropical fruit you might pick up in there. But you kind of get like flavors of maybe like grapefruit, orange, that kind of thing going on there. So just kind of really, really potent on the smell. Like you pick up a lot coming off of it.
Great hop aroma.
Yeah.
Yeah. It just kind of tastes like candied fruit.
Do you know if this is a single hop variety or if they just use Citra for flavor and aroma?
I'm not 100% certain on this, but I believe it is. Oh, you know what? I just saw on the back of the can. It says Citra and Amarillo. So Amarillo is another variety that you would expect to kind of get citrus tropical fruit forward flavors from. So I believe, yeah, Citra is sort of the predominantly featured one, but there are some other hops in there. I don't know exactly like if they use it all for bittering and aroma and flavor and all that, but it does look like there's also some Amarillo hops in here as well. So not a proper single hop beer, as they might call them.
The first time I homebrewed was 1971 when it first became legal in the United States.
Tim, before you continue, I wanted to ask you, is that your introduction to beer? Is 1971, or where did you start, and how did you become somewhat of an expert in beer?
Well, mostly from drinking a lot. Actually, I drank a lot of American pales, Coors, Bud, Miller, that sort of crap. And then someone gave me a good beer. And it was kind of funny because the first kind of really flavorful beer was a Samuel Smith's, which is a British beer, really malt forward, completely different than American beer, and I just fell in love with it. But it was like $3.50 a bottle at the time, So when the homebrew store opened down on West San Carlos in San Jose in 1971, it had been open 2 weeks, and I was in there buying stuff.
Early adopter.
And how long did you brew your own beer?
Well, about 6 years ago, I got in 2014. I started working where I'm working now, along with my other job. So when I had two jobs, there was no way for me to have enough time to brew. So that's when I brewed a few more times, and then it just kind of went away.
What? So what were you going to tell us about? So you started brewing in
71, and my beers were really bad. I mean, it's not something that just happens, especially then, because there wasn't really much in the way of good literature and homebrewing. Some of it was really really bad. Like the first book said that you went to Co-op Market and bought Bonnie Doon hopped malt extract, and you dump 2 cans of that in with some hot water and stir it up, and that's beer. Put some yeast in it. So the the techniques were still pretty bad then. And I mean, I went from doing that all the way through making all grain brews with a computer controlled temperature controller.
Yeah, well, let me tell you, in this day and age, you can still make bad beer. I've done it.
But you know, me too. It even when I was making lots of good beer, every once in a while I'd make a bad beer.
Yeah, it's always kind of a bummer too, because you go through it, especially if you're doing a 5 or 10 gallon batch, and you find out that something turned in, and it's like, now I've got to pour the whole thing out after taking hours of my time to put this together and however much money it costs. And it's kind of a bummer.
Well,
yeah.
I was going to say, but at least it's only like 3 weeks when you know.
Yeah.
I have a friend that makes wine, and you know, a year later it's no good.
Yeah.
What do you do?
Yeah. Vinegar a year down the line is no good.
So, Adam, what sort of beers do you like to drink?
So I really enjoy. Honestly, I enjoy the porters and stouts a lot more than IPAs. That's why it's still either kind of on the very light end, like the lager that we had. Like I enjoy that. Or the dark end, and kind of the IPA segment. Like I haven't been too fond of that. This one's pretty good. I do like the double and triple IPA, it's a triple IPA. That's a thing, right? Yeah,
it is.
Like I enjoy those, but it might just be because they're so strong. I can only drink a sip at a time, and yeah.
Well, you have to like that malt forward for porters and stouts,
Yeah.
and when homebrewing stouts, it's really easy to just make it too much. You know, they say put a half an ounce of chocolate malt in it. Well, 3/4 of an ounce will make it so chocolatey, so charcoaly you can't drink it. So yeah, it's really I think they're harder to make personally and make them taste good.
Even when I have them like that are professionally made, like a lot of times it comes out and I just can't drink it. If they just go a little bit too far, it's over, and and it's
striking that balance is pretty difficult. And I completely agree with you, Tim. The one time actually I tried to make a stout, I think I overdid it exactly like you said, and just came out almost tasting like dirt. Like it was just too bitter from the dark malts that we used. It was one of the earlier batches, so there may have been some other things going on there that I wasn't too sure of, but it didn't turn out too great. And on top of that, I think I overcarbonated a couple of them, so one of the bottles burst, which was a little less than amusing when the bottom of the glass bottle shot out inside the box I had it sitting in.
At least it was in a box. It could have been worse.
Yeah, it could have been a lot worse. It was kind of funny actually when it happened, because I heard the bottle explode, and this was like probably 5 days after I'd put the box in a closet, and so I heard it and I was like, what was that sound? And like never figured out what it was until a couple days later I went in there and saw one of the bottles was shattered, and I was like, oh, that must have been what that was.
I had a very similar experience with, I'd gotten some bottles and they were Coors long neck bottles, and I had 24 bottles blow up in the case in my closet, and it was a mess. It was really a mess.
Must have sounded like war going off in there.
My wife's going, what's going on? There was this weird noise coming out of the bedroom. And it was like, pop, 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 pop.
So we do have a question from an audience member who's hopefully watching the show right now. This is from Steve. He asks, sour beer seems to be catching on more and more at craft breweries. Do you see this as a trend continuing? And do you think kettle sours or barrel aged will be more popular? Now this clearly is from a sour somebody who's a fan of sours.
Sounds like it, yeah. So yeah, that's actually a pretty good question. Yeah, kettle sours I feel like have become very well. Sours actually, on the whole, have become pretty prevalent. Sort of a style originally conceived in Belgium. I don't know how long ago, but probably hundreds of years ago. And then American brewers are kind of taking it to a new level. But I'll start off with the distinction between those two things. So a kettle sour is a beer that's brewed just sort of in the same process as any other beer, and then they use essentially lactic acid to bring the pH down to make it a sour beer. A lot of times kettle sours you'll find will be fruited, so they'll add like fresh fruit of some sort in there too to give it a fruit flavor or some other flavoring components, just to kind of give it some sort of profile. Barrel aged sours are generally ones that they'll use wild yeast, or sometimes strains that they like lactobacillus or something that they have on hand. But those are usually put in barrels and then they sour over time as the yeast sort of ferments it over a long period of time, and those can change a lot over periods of time. The distinguished, or the probably the major factor there, and which one will kind of catch on and be more prevalent, is the barrel aged sort of wild fermented ones. Obviously take a lot more time and space because they have to hold, and you have to get barrels. So there's a lot more money involved storing barrels full of sour beer for extended periods of time. They'll age them for months to years, depending on the beer. And so it's a big capital cost for breweries versus a kettle sour they can kind of do more rapidly. And I feel like in at least for the average consumer, the kettle sours are a little more approachable because they're usually fruit flavored in some fashion or another. That's pretty common. So it's kind of something, if you're a kid who liked Warheads or something like that, it's got kind of that vibe to it. Versus wild fermented sours, they can be fruited as well, but they'll sit in the barrel for a while and they'll have interesting yeast strains, and they'll get imparted with some pretty interesting sort of funky flavors. So it's more of an acquired taste and probably kind of more a beer nerd type thing. So I think kettle sours are probably definitely going to be on the rise more so than their barrel aged brethren.
Thanks. Did you guys ever make sours?
By accident.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, if you look at the history of sour beers, they started out where they would brew a batch of beer and then not pitch yeast in it, just leave it open.
Yep.
And so every batch would be different because it would be slightly different strain of wild yeast that got in it. So also very early on, when the Belgian monks were doing it, in order to adjust the flavors, they would blend several barrels together to try to get the exact flavor profile they wanted out of it. So to do that now would, on a commercial scale, would be really, really expensive.
Yeah, and there actually are guys doing it here in America. And again, it's usually people who have a lot of money to put behind it, but still in Belgium as well. So probably one of the most famous like wild sour makers is a brewery called Cantillon in Belgium. And they do exactly that. So they brew what's called a lambic, which is a wild fermented beer, and then they blend them, multiple lambics, into what you would call a goose. So a goose is basically a blended lambic. And yeah, you're exactly right. That's what they do, is to try to get like a particular flavor profile. They'll blend the different lambics to make gooses, which is a pretty interesting thing. But actually, even here in America, where probably like barrel-aged stouts and barley wines and those kinds of things have caught on big time, they'll blend different barrels of those too to try to get like certain flavor profiles. So a lot of breweries they'll have barrel aged programs where they have people who do tastings of the barrels like every so often to see when to pull it out of the barrel and which barrel's flavor profile works with another barrel, so that they can blend it into into what they believe is the best product they can put out to the public. But yeah, there's a whole science behind all that as well.
I read an article about Boston Lager doing an experiment with where they did, I think, like 100 barrels of to come up with one barrel that they thought was good, and it's just, well, first off, I don't like sour beer, so I thought it was kind of a waste of time. But to each their own, you know. I have friends that love it. I know a guy that will let his hops get stale before he uses them to add to the flavor profile, because as the hops stale, they also are kind of souring, and and he had a bag of hops in his garage once, and he says, "You should smell that." And I did, and I was sorry.
Fool me once, shame on you.
Absolutely.
So, hey, gentlemen, we have one more beer to get to.
Yeah.
So, have you guys, I don't know if you finished your first two beers, but I definitely have.
No.
But Kyle, please introduce it. And then we have another guest coming on right after that.
Yeah. Sure. So I'll next beer up is going to be a robust porter called Ossuary from a brewery called Ghost Town in Oakland.
This is my kind of beer. Here we go.
Yeah, exactly. So we're right in your neck of the woods now, Adam. So a robust porter. A porter is generally a little bit lighter than a stout, just a little bit, but still kind of really dark in color. Got kind of a roasty, chocolatey sort of flavor profile. A robust porter is generally one just slightly stronger than a porter. So porters probably end up around the 5% alcohol area. This one's around 6.5%, which usually gives it a little bit more body and just kind of to me, I always get a little bit more roast character out of it. I tend to like really dark roast coffees and things like that. So I think that's why I sort of gravitate towards this, because it gives me more of that sort of deep roast flavor profile kind of thing. So.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It smells great. It does smell like a coffee. Like, actually, yeah, it smells very much like a coffee. Does this... is this actually caffeinated? Will this actually keep me awake? Is this...
No.
They do put coffee in some dark beers, but this one it's all malt.
So the history of a porter beer was in England was kind of the everyman's beer, thusly a porter's beer, and it was usually made with the grains that weren't quite as good as the other grains that got roasted a little more than they should have been, and thusly giving it that deep color. And it was, we're talking about the 1700s, was considered kind of a poor man's beer, but yet in that time frame in London, people drank more porter beer than they did water because the water wasn't any good.
Sure.
But wasn't beer made with water? Wouldn't that have similar problems?
But it got boiled.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's exactly right. And you kind of think of England, I feel like, for the average person when you hear porter, or at least the UK, because like porters and stouts and dark beers, I mean, Guinness, probably the most famous dark beer of all time, is from Ireland. And yeah, you always think people think of England as having warm, flat beer, which isn't exactly right, but it is warmer and flatter than what we drink here in America. And yeah, exactly. Maybe an English mild, but porter's kind of right there is one of the things I associate with England.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of the traditional porters were very low carbonated too. They were cask conditioned with a hand pump. But beer's been around for so damn long. Excuse my language, but it's been around so long that all these titles and have all kind of blurred a little bit.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, there's so many different styles of beer today that it's kind of sometimes you're sort of just like, well, wait, what's the difference? And I mean, a lot of people ask what the difference between porter and stout is, and I feel like I can kind of tell the difference, but sometimes I'll see imperial porter and imperial stout, and then I'm at that point I'm just like, it's the same thing. Like I don't know what you're trying to other than marketing, I don't know what the difference is personally.
Yeah. Well, and to me, this whole thing in America with the craft brew all kind of started with Sierra Nevada. Sierra Nevada, if if it wasn't for Sierra Nevada, I think we would all still be drinking Bud and Coors.
Yeah. Them, and maybe you could credit Sam Adams as well. Probably two of the biggest ones at the time. And if you're
Yeah,
on the
that's
East
right.
Coast, New England Lager is a pretty big one too, and they've been around for forever. But I completely agree, especially coming out of California. I mean, we probably owe all of this to Ken Grossman in Sierra Nevada for putting out the pale ale and just kind of showing people, wow, this is what beer with a little extra flavor can taste like.
So, gentlemen, we have a question and answer, but it looks like we have Jazz Deep, so he might just stay on with us for a little bit. Jazz Deep Hundal has a question, and Jazz Deep is also, to introduce him, he is the person that got Kyle into this into beer, and he is probably a beer expert in his own right. So,
Hey,
welcome,
folks.
Jazz Deep. Hey.
I will take credit for getting Kyle into beer, but he is watching the industry right now in ways that I never did. So he is the real expert in my eyes. I would actually like to get Kyle and Tim's opinions on two different questions if we have time.
Well, thanks.
And
Thanks, I appreciate that. Yeah.
the first one here is so when I go to all my favorite local breweries these days, it seems like half the taps are hazy or Northeast style IPAs, which I love the style. But do you folks feel like maybe that's denting the innovation in other areas of brewing, in other styles and such?
Personally, I have to say, so hazy IPA, just for a little clarification out there. So like this one that we were drinking before is a West Coast. It's actually not quite perfectly clear, but definitely much clearer than what you would see in a Northeast style. And it's named a Northeast style because it came out of the Northeast of the United States. But they're known for sort of being lower on the bitterness scale compared to what we would call a West Coast IPA. Pretty much completely opaque. Almost looking like orange juice sometimes, and then having just a very intense aroma and flavor profile of usually like tropical citrus fruits. So just for a lot of people, probably something a little more approachable than a West Coast IPA, which can have a pretty intense bitterness at sometimes. It can be kind of like piney and bitter, sort of herbal at times. The Northeast style is a lot more fruit forward and milder on the bitterness scale. So you're completely right. I mean, hazy IPA is pretty much the biggest trend in craft beer today. And I shouldn't even call it a trend anymore. It's not a trend. It's in my opinion here to stay, and I think most people agree. But it is a relatively new style. It's only been around, I think, in maybe mostly just this decade, and it really took off probably around 2015, 2016, and expanded sort of all over the nation. But I don't, in terms of how it impacts innovation here across different breweries, I kind of get where you're coming from in terms of saying that, oh, if they're focusing all their attention on putting out so many hazy IPAs, are they putting attention elsewhere? But I mean, I think breweries are still doing a pretty good job of innovating and coming up with new things, even despite that. And I sort of would equate it to something like West Coast IPA before the hazy IPA came around. I mean, that's pretty much what everyone was putting out in droves before then, and they were still able to innovate back then as well. So I think there's still some pretty cool and interesting things coming out of the brewery industry at this time, and I think there's still definitely room for innovation and for new things.
My opinion is that the hazy IPA is something that there's a place for it in beer, but what has happened is a few years back, most craft brewers made beers they liked. And now craft brewers have to make beers that follow trends. So it's just part of the industry growing up, is that we started with Dan Gordon used to make beers he liked and only make beers he liked. But now you go into Gordon Beer, she doesn't own it anymore. You go into Gordon Beers and they make beers following trends. So it's a natural progression of the industry. But when I find a brew pub that has 3 or 4 beers that they just like and that's what they make and they're not following the trends, I like that brew pub. Even if I don't like their beer, I like that brew pub.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there, Tim. That's a good point, and it is nice to see that even if they have 3 or 4 hazy IPAs on tap, if they have some light lagers or some porters or something to differentiate their tap list that you can kind of tell was made from their own love rather than what needs to sell. Because at the end of the day, they're a business and they need to make money, and I get it. But as long as they're still putting out stuff that they enjoy and that they're pushing the envelope for themselves, then I think that's what really matters at the end of the day. Pay the bills and enjoy yourself.
All right, and I think Jasdeep has one more question.
And actually, Tim gave me the perfect lead into this one regarding trends here. So maybe more of a note on what we consider craft beer culture, but we see a lot of breweries these days producing hard seltzers because it's a similar process. And that is not really something I would call beer, but at the same time, the earliest beers that we've seen in ancient times weren't actually flavored with hops either. So I would like to get your folks' thoughts on when is it no longer a beer, even though it's been brewed with grain?
Is this like, are we talking about sours here?
No.
No.
I think my opinion on this is that beer has to be somewhat traditional. I think beer needs hops. It needs some malt forward. When you make a malt alcohol, I mean, that's different. That's not beer. We shouldn't call that beer. A lot of these, like wine coolers, are actually made with beer. They ferment a malt alcohol, distill it to get some of the flavor out, and then add flavor back afterwards. It's not beer. Seltzers, they're not beer. They're a malt beverage.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with Tim pretty closely. So I also agree that it needs hops to be beer. I wouldn't consider seltzer beer. But there are some other trends that I think Jasdeep may have been alluding to, such as stuff like they'll do fruited kettle sours with lactose and vanilla. And when you start adding all these things and so lactose will be in there for extra sweetness and kind of making it thick. And they do stuff like milkshake IPAs or smoothie IPAs, smoothie sours. It starts to make you wonder a little bit, is this more about tasting like a milkshake or a smoothie, like something fruity and sort of easy to put down rather than being beer itself? I still consider those things beer in most cases, but I think they're starting to push the envelope a little more into the territory of being more like seltzer or malt liquor. Like Tim was saying, it's like, all right, at this point, it's verging on maybe not being beer at some point, but they're definitely pushing the envelope in a lot of ways like that. And maybe they'll grow into some sort of subcategory of their own. I'm not sure.
I absolutely hope they do grow into their own subcategory, because we need to somewhat define beer as beer. And if it, what was it? I think Budweiser came out with a clear, sweet malt beverage that was kind of a beer because it was made with the beer process, but it was not beer.
Now, what about Starbucks cold draft? Like, I feel like that's called a cold draft. Definitely trying to attract beer people. At least it seemed like it.
Yeah, the nitro coffee, and they serve it, I think, even in pint glasses in some of them.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of funny too. I mean, obviously that's not beer in any manner. It's just coffee that's been carbonated with nitrogen. But yeah, it goes back to, I think, porters and stouts and stuff like that tasting like coffee, and that's sort of a common way to serve them. So I think they're trying to make that sort of leap. And I think there's probably a lot of people in the beer world who are also coffee drinkers, coffee connoisseurs or enjoyers. And so I think that's kind of an easy leap for them to make. And I think that's a good point. That's definitely a connection between the two worlds.
But it is not beer.
No, sir.
Well, it's like I make a beer and I run it through a still, and it's a clear liquid. I call it a beer, but the federal government has a different idea about that.
Well, hey, is that looks like we answered his question. We have one more question that came in, and I'm going to simplify this down, but this is from Justin Ing, who was our first guest on the Happy Hour, and he asks, Egyptians buried their dead with valued possessions so they could be enjoyed in the afterlife. After factoring in potential spoilage, what beer would you like to be buried with? I think let's go with you, Tim, first.
Well, I think I drank probably a few 100 gallons of Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, that it was my day-to-day beer. Probably a Sierra Nevada Pale Ale.
All right.
I saw a picture once of Khrushchev with a bottle of Sierra Nevada in his hand. So, even though they didn't make it till after he was dead, but
Yeah, I'd have to say I think that's a little bit of a leading question, because I feel like Justin's trying to rule out IPAs there for the most part, because he said to factor in potential spoilage. So I'd have to probably have to go with an imperial stout or a barley wine of some sort. Probably one of my favorite, sort of easy to get, and actually in the same vein as Tim, Sierra Nevada puts this one out, but Narwhal Imperial Stout from Sierra Nevada, I think, is a really well done beer, and would hopefully hold up the test of time in the afterlife for when I get to come back to it.
So my favorite beer, the one that I would want to be buried with, is really Chimay, probably the blue. And the reason is that this beer really got my attention, as far as like just the story about monks making it, and the cobwebs being over it, and like them filtering, keeping it clean and from bugs, and like the whole story about Chimay, I just really appreciated. So that would be what I would be buried with.
Cheers to the monks.
There we go. And spiders. Well, thanks, guys. I think that's all we have time for. So thank you very much, Kyle, for coming on to our show. We will have to do this again.
Yeah, glad to be here. Thank you guys for having me on.
And Tim, thanks for co-hosting again, and we'll do this again.
Yeah, beer too.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. Thank you for joining the Happy Hour, and see you next time.